MEC Weziwe, program directors, MECs, the Deputy Mayor of eThekwini, members of the Fourth Estate who are here, and fellow Africans. Let me just take this opportunity to thank GCIS for providing this opportunity. This is really a series of work that we are doing on the continent to popularize the work of the AU, not necessarily in the 4 years. Last month, we were in Pretoria with the African Editors Forum, and again, we were in Cameroon, talking about Agenda 2063. We were in Kigali, so it's work that is going on so that citizens can know what is happening at the AU and know that the AU is not just for governments, but citizens as well. So I thank you very much for being here. Some of you would remember that in 2002, in this very city, we launched the African Union. And at the time, that was in 2002, and at the time of that launch, the governments and the people of the continent committed themselves to building an Africa that is prosperous, integrated, peaceful, and driven by its own citizens, and playing a dynamic role in the global arena. So the launch of the AU at that point, following the Organization of African Unity, was informed by the fact that the role of the major mandate of the OAU was to decolonize Africa. And at that point, especially after the liberation of Namibia in South Africa, the Africans felt that the organization needed to be transformed and needed a new mandate. But we must also just remind ourselves that when we celebrated the 50th anniversary in 2013 of the OAU, now AU, we recommitted ourselves to completing the decolonization process to protect the right to self-determination for African people who are still under colonial rule, pledge solidarity with the peoples of African descent and African diaspora in their struggles against racial discrimination, and resist all forms of influence contrary to the interest of the continent. And of course, people may say, why were we recommitting ourselves to decolonization? We must just remind you that there are still some pockets of Africa that still need to be decolonized, and that is the Chagos archipelago of Mauritius. There are some islands around Mauritius which are still occupied. The Comorian island of Mayotte is still occupied. And of course, the self-determination of the people of Western Sahara is still elusive. So, fellow Africans, this commitment to create a prosperous Africa is at the center of Agenda 2063, the Africa we want. Because we decided that we needed a framework that can be common to all African countries towards development, the development of Africa. And this Agenda 2063 was very important because, as we know, the decades of the 70s and 90s in Africa were really decades of stagnation, decades of coups, decades that saw Africa being underdeveloped, marginalized, bad governance, despite the fact that Africa is so rich in mineral resources, in its people, in productive land, diverse ecosystems, oil and gas, flora and fauna. The paradox is that, yes, Africa is rich, but the Africans are still poor. If we look at the least developed countries of the world, there are 48 of them, and 34 are on the continent. So it was important that we put all the frameworks that we have, and we undertook a process of consultations. The first draft of Agenda 2063 came from the citizens, not from governments. Different sectors were consulted, and they came up with Agenda 2063, which was then given to countries to go and consult in their own countries and consult the people. So how are we going about to create this prosperous Africa? Clearly, we have to use the resources we have to create this prosperity. And the most abundant and most precious resource we have is our people to start with. The African continent is a growing population, a young population. So we have started what we call a skills revolution on the continent. The skills revolution means that African children should go to school, they should be educated, but they should be skilled in all the different levels of skills, from STEM, which is science, technology, engineering, and maths, to technical technologies, technicians, vocational schools, so that African children are skilled because the economy of today needs the skills. And of course, the African Union itself has also looked at how we can harmonize education across the continent. So there is work going on with 200 participating universities. Initially, there were 42, and now there are 200 participating universities trying to improve the harmonization, whether it be in medicine, teacher education, mechanical engineering, agriculture, civil engineering, economics, geology, higher education, and many others. We have also, we are advocating that we should get more kids in higher education, and therefore the enrollment in higher education must increase. If we look at the number of students at our universities, they've grown exponentially. But if we look, for instance, in 1991, there were 2.7 million students at universities. And now we're well over 10 million university students that are qualifying every year. But where are they qualifying is one of the questions. They tend to qualify more in the social sciences. The split is about 90 to 10 in other places. In other places is 90 to 20. But generally, the split is like that. And that split needs to be changed. We believe that that split needs to go to something like 30, 70, in favor of the sciences. So education is very important. And I'll just make examples of how universities have grown in some of our in our countries on the continent. We'll all know about the University of Maghreb, a Ugandan university, because that was the university that was there. But now they have six more public universities. Zimbabwe in 1980, during its independence, had the university, but now they have 12, 8 public and 4 private. Ethiopia had 2, and now they have 30 universities. Nigeria and Egypt have the highest number of students in higher education, 1 million and 1.8 million respectively. And Nigeria has more than 150 universities, some private, some public. So this has grown phenomenally. But still, as Africa as a whole, we are below the 10% access to higher university. And so if you are below 10%, it really means that all you are doing is to reproduce the elite. So we need to increase, because we have to be over 25% to start massifying, and you have to be over 40% access to start making it a universal access. So Africa as a whole needs to increase. But of course there are challenges in this area, the financing, not only in South Africa, elsewhere as well. But the view of Africa is that there should be no child that is denied education at any level because of poverty. So children must have, it's a right that they must be able to exercise. If they are poor, they must be assisted. The AU has also identified some gaps in the education, and they've decided to start a continental university, starting with 5 campuses, which are going to be campuses of excellence. And these are in Algeria, in a city called Tlemcen, the Tlemcen Institute. And that one is concentrating on water resources, environmental studies, and climate change. But it admits students from all over Africa in those disciplines. And then South Africa has been given the campus for space sciences. And that one is going to be at the Cape University of Technology. And it will admit students from all over Africa who want to study space sciences. It's the last one the others are already operational. And then we have one in Kenya, which is on basic sciences, technology, and innovation. It's linked to the Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology. And then the last one is in Yaoundé, in Cameroon. That one is looking at governance, humanities, and social sciences. And there is a view that we must increase these campuses. We must have one on maritime studies, and identify others as we go along. Because it's clear that unless we get this skills revolution right, we are not going to be able to reach this prosperity soon. And of course, just to say that next year is also the year of harnessing the demographic dividend in Africa, and education will be also featuring. We also have campaigns for girls to be at school and against child marriages, because it's girls who tend to be married as children. And so we are having that campaign because girls must be at school like everybody else. The next area that we have focused on is agriculture, because we still have a lot of agricultural land on the continent, and we can still increase the productivity of agriculture. And of course, the agriculture and agribusiness are growing, is growing on the continent. It's grown from 13 billion, it's growing to a 13 billion industry, and we want it to grow to be a trillion business industry, and it's possible for it. And it's projected that by 2030, it will be a trillion business industry. And of course, we are also encouraging African countries to keep putting more money and investing on agriculture, because we have seen that those who have put 10% of their budget in agriculture, they are showing very good results. And we need this urgently, because Africa is importing a lot of processed food from abroad and spending tens of billions of dollars that should be utilized for other things. There is also a problem at the universities. It was recognized about 10 years ago that there weren't young people coming into the pipeline in agriculture. The professors in agriculture were growing old, but there were no young people coming in. So 8 universities came together to see how they can encourage young people to study agriculture, research, innovate, do their masters and their PhDs. And we are glad to say that that movement is increasing. Now we have 68 universities who are doing that work, including 5 in South Africa. And we are still encouraging many more to come in. We also remember that Pixley Gaseme, in his Regeneration of Africa speech, recognized the importance of integration of African countries and linked that African integration to development and prosperity. And many other leaders, 50 years ago, Haile Selassie, Sekou Toure, NASA, Nyerere, Nkrumah, all called for Africa to unite or perish. So I just want to say a few things on the integration. It's very important. It was important then, but it's even more important now as globalization, the travel of information, technology, communication technology have created a global village of this big world. It's now become much smaller. The economic shocks, the booms affect us all. The diseases such as HIV, as we saw, Ebola, Zika, SARS, and many others know no borders. And so the imperative for integration is even more urgent today. So what is happening on the continent? The continental integration is based on regional economic communities. So I will talk about the regional economic communities, what they are doing in terms of integration. I'll start with looking at trade. The 3, COMESA, East African Community, and SADC, have come together on the 15th of June 2015 into a tripartite free trade area. And that is very exciting for all of us because it has 26 countries and 626 million people and a $1.2 trillion GDP. So, and we think that can then be part of the creating a backbone for continental free trade. So I'll come back to the continental free trade. And then let's look at North Africa, which is called the Arab Maghreb Union, which is the countries in the north that border with the Mediterranean. They have signed 4 protocols of the union's free trade area. And ECOWAS has established its customs union in 2015, January. And other RECs like the East African Community are now applying zero average tariffs on imports within the community. ECAS and COMESA both apply tariffs averaging only around 1.9%. And COMESA, EAC, ECOWAS, and SADC have also taken steps to facilitate transport and to lower the non-tariff barriers so that trade can increase between and within those RECs. And this is important because when we look at other RECs in other regions, whether it's ASEAN, in Asia, Mercosur, in Latin America, we are lagging behind as the continent, but COMESA and ECOWAS are comparing very well in terms of labor movement within those RECs. We need, when about 5 years ago, the intra-African trade was only at about 12%. Today it's about 18%. It's still very low compared to the average of 40% in other areas. So we need to increase the intra-African trade, but we can only do that if we manufacture. And so we need to develop our industries, whether it's in agriculture, whether it's value addition for our minerals, our natural resources, so that we manufacture and we have a lot more to trade. I'm very happy to say there are countries that have even started industrial parks which are functioning now as part of the push towards industrialization. And this will be great for intra-African trade, but also for global trade. But of course, there are other things we need to do if we are to increase trade, like the Continental Free Trade, which was launched. The negotiations were launched last year, and those negotiations are continuing, because if we have a Continental Free Trade, it will make easier to trade amongst ourselves, but also for the world to trade with us. The other area I want to touch on is infrastructure development, because we can have goods. If we can't move them across the continent, we will not be able to increase trade quickly. And also people need to move across the continent. So there is infrastructure in terms of transport, roads, rail, and air. And I'll just mention some of the projects that are in the pipeline, like the Dakar, N'Djamena, Djibouti Transport Corridor, which is being developed. We're looking at working towards making it into a bankable project. There's the Djibouti-Libreville Transport Corridor. The Djibouti-Ethiopia part is now done, and we need to, the rest needs to be done. The Lobito Transport Corridor, the Trans-African Highway, which will link Kinshasa and Brazzaville through a bridge, and the Cotonou, Ouagadougou, Niamey, Abidjan Railway. So those who don't know geography, you can go and check where those are. And a bridge that will, in the Gambia, that should link the Senegal and the Gambia. And of course, we are also looking at using technology to advance some of these. So we're looking at the high-speed rail network on the continent. We don't see why we should still be looking at 1972 technology when there's new technology in rail. So we're establishing a unit at NEPAD that will be looking at how to link Africa through the high-speed rail network. We know it will take decades to do, but the work has to start now. We're also looking at a link in terms of air. A lot of you will know that before we used to fly to Europe before coming back to Africa, and now I'm very proud to say that that is happening very rarely. In part because Ethiopian Airways, which is the largest airline in Africa now, flies to almost every African country. I think countries that they don't fly to, you can count with your hand. They fly almost in every country, so we are able now to fly directly from one African capital to the other. Also, SAA has increased its destinations in Africa. Air Kenya has also done so. So we can see that there is improvement there. And there is also work that is happening to try and create one African aviation market. There are countries that have come together to start that work because we couldn't wait for the slowest. So we decided 2 years ago that we should just get those countries that are ready to work together to create this. So there's progress there. And then there's ICT infrastructure, which is very important, as you all know, because it's without that you can't really leapfrog development, because communication is at the center of that. And we are happy to say that the market in terms of mobile phones has been growing phenomenally. There's 65% growth annually just over the last 5 years we've seen on the continent. And also banking and other innovative projects, information to farmers and e-commerce has really assisted to move things. We are also looking at the Pan-African Internet Exchange System project, and quite a number of countries on the continent, 32 by 2016, have internet exchange points now. And we also have 8 internet exchange points of Congo, Egypt, Gabon, Kenya, Nigeria, Rwanda, South Africa, and Zimbabwe. And South Africa and Zimbabwe have been awarded grants to grow to become regional internet exchange points. And Kenya has been awarded a grant with the support of the AU in establishing the first global roaming exchange in Africa and only the 4th in the world. So all this work is happening, and we are also looking at free movement of people, because integration is not just about money, it's not just about goods, but it's also about people. And to this, I will just mention that in ECOWAS, people are moving freely within that sub-region, and they even have an ECOWAS passport. They are now looking at doing away with resident permits and doing away with work permits in that region, and they are looking at having an ECOWAS ID so that you can move freely with your ID within the 15 countries that form that sub-region. The East African community is doing the same, and others are following, but those are the 2 that are really leading when it comes to free movement of people. And when we look at continental free movement of people, we have, a decision has been taken that countries must at least give a 30-day visa at the port of entry for all Africans. Some countries are saying they are still putting mechanisms to make it possible to implement, but I'll name those who have already implemented, like Seychelles, Mozambique, Rwanda, Comoros, Uganda, Madagascar, and Ghana, and Benin is following and Namibia is following, so hopefully more and more countries will open for that. And I just want to say the country that led this move was Rwanda. Now Rwanda is the smallest in terms of geography, but they are the ones who opened up for all Africans first. And what has happened to Rwanda? That kind of policy has seen them increase their tourism by 24%. It has seen them increase their trade with their neighboring countries by 50%. And it has seen increase in trade with the DRC by 73%. So generally, the free movement of people has more advantages than disadvantages. And of course, if people are free to come in, they come and go, they don't stay, because they know that they can come in tomorrow. But if they are not allowed to come in, once they come in, they will not want to go because they don't know whether they'll be able to get the opportunity to come back again. So I think it's very important to look at this, and we are now developing a comprehensive protocol on free movement of people, and we hope that that will be finished by signed by 2018. But in the meantime, this decision of allowing people for a 30-day visa, we hope more countries are going to join. We are also developing an African passport, and I must say I've been very privileged to be able to use an African passport when I travel across African countries. I don't need a visa. Though sometimes our immigration here say, no, where is your national passport? And I say, no, I'm using the AU African passport. So I think when we have the African passport, the decision has been taken that African countries, each African country will be the one that decides who it gives, because we as the AU cannot be the ones that give African passport to citizens. We don't know them, we don't have the population register, so each country has to do that. I also want to just touch on the peace, security, and human rights and democracy issues. As you know, in the 80s and 90s, we saw lots of conflict, military rule, and that ended up with a genocide in Rwanda in '94. And of course, with the AU Constitutive Act coming into force, the AU Charter said no interference in anybody's country, internal affairs. The AU Constitutive Act shifted a little, and it said, and it had a principle of non-indifference, that we can't be indifferent to what is going on in another country. So it's a step away from the one that was at the OAU, which said no interference. And the African peace and security architecture has come into being, and the African Charter on People and Human Rights, and the Charter on Democracy, Elections, and Government and Governance. And all these are trying to create a kind of environment within Africa that allows participatory democracy, that allows human rights, that decreases conflicts. But of course, we also believe that you cannot sustain peace if you don't have development. And you can't have development if you don't have peace. So the two have to go together. You can't say, no, we'll just deal with the peace issues. We have to deal with both. We still have some pockets of problems in Burundi, in South Sudan, in Somalia, in Libya. And we are hopefully going to see the end of the Darfur problem. There's still issues around Mali and Central African Republic in terms of security. And we are happy to say that the Boko Haram, the countries that are dealing with it are doing a good job. It's decreasing. And so we hope that with time, we will see very little of it. But we also believe that peace and terrorism cannot only be dealt with militarily. You also need to win the hearts and minds of your population, because it's the young people who get recruited by extremists. And if you don't win their hearts and minds so that they don't get attracted to extremists, it will be a problem. Governance, there's lots of improvement, but there's still a lot more to improve. On elections, during these past 4 years, we have actually observed 50 elections in our continent. A lot of them have gone well, but others not so well, as we have seen. We are dealing with the issue of the Gambia right now, where the election actually went well, but the incumbent does not want to accept the results. So it's an issue that is being dealt with. But on the whole, democracy is really taking root on the continent. But you see, democracy for its sake is not useful. It needs to translate into the change in our people's lives on the continent and their freedoms. The other area that I thought I should just touch on, because we said it's a prosperous, peaceful, integrated continent. I've dealt with those three, but we said it's driven by its citizens. So I want to touch on that to say that we have increased the participation of women on the continental issues of youth, of students, of cultural workers, of business, and many other sectors. And as you saw during the Ebola, we had business people participating, giving money, giving logistic for our health workers. We also saw an unprecedented solidarity amongst African people, because we were able to mobilize more than 800 health workers who volunteered to go and work in the Ebola areas. And of course, governments allowed them, and so we saw a very good part of continental solidarity by citizens themselves. And if it was not for them, probably the Ebola epidemic would still be raging on. We, as I said earlier, are having meetings of African Editors Forum, because we want editors and journalists to be part of the AU work, to implement it in their own space, but also to advocate for it, to popularize it. We also have involved young people. Every year we've had what we call intergenerational dialogue, where young people and other generations come and have a dialogue, and students. So, because we believe very much that citizens have to be part of this African Union. And during these 4 years, we've also seen, as we have been advocating for the blue ocean economy, that Africa must not run away from the ocean. The ocean is a big resource, and it's the next economic frontier. We've seen the establishment of the organization called WIMA, Women in Maritime in Africa, which has women from many countries, including this one, who want to be involved in the maritime space. We've also encouraged women in mining to come together There are campaigns like Elect Here to help more women to come into parliament and to the public service. And recently, we saw a very exciting campaign launched by women, especially women farmers, who actually gathered in Mount Kilimanjaro and debated the issues around land, women's land rights, and ended up adopting a charter on women's land rights, which will be handed over to the heads of state in January. So citizens, the artists have been working and getting involved. So, and of course we also have the ECOSOC in Africa, which is the People's Union, so that civil society is part of the union. So there's lots happening there in terms of writers, in the literature, in the arts, in the films. So really Africans are participating. And we also want to just touch on the issue of self-reliance, because the continent has been having a continuous battle about who funds its work, and we've all said, well, who pays the piper calls the tune. So we are very happy that heads of state decided that they are now going to increase the level of funding to the AU and decrease the dependence on other people. They decided that they are going to fund 100% of the operational budget, 75% of the program budget, and 25% of its piece. And they've also taken a decision that no country should say it cannot afford, and that's why they introduced a binding 0.2% AU levy on eligible African imports into Africa. So this is a very important step, because even 35 years ago, it was said that we should be more self-reliant, but we had not really moved forward with that. And the last area I want to touch on in the minutes I have is the AU's involvement with the rest of the world. Of course, the continent is taking its rightful place in the world. It needs to do more. We participate in international organizations, but we are also having partnerships with many countries that have similar and complementary agendas, so that we can work together to realize the Africa we want. So, and of course, as part of the work on the skills revolution, we have also established the AU Academy, which was launched in January this year, so that not only for the workers at the AU, but also for civil servants on the continent who can come for short periods and learn about the AU and Pan-Africanism. We have also made sure that the AU has processes that are more accountable and transparent, whether it's in procurement, whether it's in recruitment, in financial rules, and in many other areas. So, in a just very brief moment, I'll try to capture some of the things that the continent is doing. And I also want to say, just lastly, we've recognized that Agenda 2063 and the skills revolution need a dialogue between business, academia, and the politicians. And we are going to have the first forum of that kind in Mauritius next year, March 19th to the 21st, so that the training of students is in line with what the economy needs, and they have access to politicians to say what are their constraints, and this three-way dialogue is very important for us. Thank you very much.